they hear this, they gon' say he made an anthem. Life ain't a pageant. Stay black and white, it's a canvas. Spike Lee your dreams and Bruce Lee your tantrums. Two free that bull, then go Michael Jordan, go Samson. Knock down the walls around me, strong and dark and so handsome. Everything around me is shining dark and the time is divine. I found a spark when the clouds leak and the rain falling. I found peace. Black as the concrete, black as the street that's lined with the palm trees. I'm black as the night sky when you broken your radio, bacon just don't meet. Black as the bottom of Chuck Taylor, black as the haters, black as the bar rubber hitting donuts in front of the store with 2 months later they got stopped.
KBLA Talk 1580, you know where you're at. We don't black down. I'm Dominique DiPrima, and it is a Talking Point Tuesday, but we're about to get into a conversation I've been looking forward to with a writer who I have not actually met before, but I'm meeting right now. He's from L.A. He now lives in the other much more human L.A. And has reported from more than a dozen U.S. states and Palestine, Mexico, Uganda, and Vietnam for newspapers and magazines, from the New York Times to the Guardian. He's the co-author of The Problem with Plastic, and was a 2025 writer in residence at the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. Right now, he's a climate and environment reporter at Capital B News, which is a nonprofit newsroom. If you're not up on it, you definitely should check it out. They're focused on the Black experience. Before joining Capital B, he was an environmental justice reporter at Grist and reported on police and prisons in Chicago. Quite a wide portfolio. Welcome, Adam Mahoney.
Thanks for having me.
You write about everything, in other words, basically.
You know, over the years, I definitely have.
Yeah. But right now, focusing primarily on the climate emergency and all the issues surrounding it, correct?
Exactly that, yes, in the ways that, you know, both climate change and environmental threats within the context of the U.S. disproportionately impact Black folks.
Right. I mean, which is something we hear, but I don't know if people really put guts to that, you know, unless you're one of the people that lives with a battery recycling plant, or you're one of the kids that goes to, you know, high school in Watts right next to a scrap metal recycling plant and has their football field with little bits of shrapnel on it. Unless you're directly impacted like that, I think that almost sounds like a slogan and not like a real, you know, guts and bits kind of impact.
Yeah. I mean, it is a tough thing because, you know, to your point, when these phrases get repeated so often and honestly, when, you know, political actors use them as a way to, like, divide people, it does remove itself from the stakes a bit. But really, when you boil it down, I mean, it is the reality. And it is true. It's easier to see that you're being impacted by environmental threats if you are living next to, you know, a warehouse or an oil refinery, or if you're being impacted by climate change if you are living in the Gulf Coast and, you know, being hit by hurricanes. But I mean, the reality is folks across the country are experiencing it in different ways. So, like, in LA, it looks like, you know, Black neighborhoods, it's, you know, 10 degrees hotter than if you go, you know, northwest up to, like, Malibu.
Is that true?
That's climate change and environmental threats. Yeah, when we're thinking about the urban heat island effect.
I mean, because I just assume, well, you know, Santa Monica's closer to the ocean. Of course it's cooler. But you're saying that's not the only reason.
Yeah, I mean, the big reason is actually that in urban centers across the country, Los Angeles included, we're, you know, living in places that have been paved over with concrete. So that makes areas hotter. You have less tree cover. You know, you see folks maybe waiting for the bus in places where there's no shade, there's no trees. Those are things that add up to making a place much more hotter.
It's interesting you say that, because I've always wondered, Adam Mahoney, why is it that elected officials are always complaining about not having enough trees and pledging to plant trees, but in my community in South LA, all I see them doing is cutting down trees and trimming them back to stumps.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, and that just exasperates the problem right there. There's definitely a disconnect between what politicians say when we're thinking about these threats and what they do. I mean, we can just look, right now there was a massive tree planting initiative kind of implemented under Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, and that has just been stalled right across the country. All of those efforts are being rolled back under Trump. So yeah, they're definitely not working in the best interest of folks all the time.
Okay, so I want to reel back just a little here. We were talking about bringing this idea of disproportionate impact on Black communities specifically and BIPOC communities in a more general sense to life. And you mentioned just simply 10 degrees of difference in the heat between those neighborhoods. Can you give me any other examples, like something that really stood out in your mind? And of course, I think about these oil wells because a lot of us, even sort of the affluent Black communities, right next to active oil wells, and most of us don't even pay any mind to it, even though that's not good for your health. But I'm wondering if there's other examples you could give that illustrate this impact.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the context of Los Angeles, that is a really, really great point around oil wells. For example, most people don't know that Los Angeles is actually on top of the largest urban oil drilling network in the United States. My parents grew up in Gardena, where oil wells dot that area. I grew up further south in the Wilmington neighborhood off of the Port of LA, and that's where the highest concentration of oil wells are. So those are things that you might see the infrastructure and not actually connect the dots. That like living next to an oil well increases like issues with preterm births and birth rates, higher asthma rates. It relates to, just the constant up and down bobbing of the oil well actually relates to like issues of, higher levels of like migraines and then mental health struggles, and all of those things are scientifically documented and connected.
Mental health struggles? I never heard that one before.
Yeah. I mean, so I actually did a feature a couple of years ago around the Port of Los Angeles and the communities there, and just when you're living next to higher levels of like polluting infrastructure, and honestly infrastructure that just like looks ugly and smells and does all those things, people are less likely to interact with like the environment around them. So it's more of a sedentary lifestyle that people are living in those communities. You're cooped up in your home. And it has been connected then to elevated levels of anxiety and depression. And then that also relates to, bigger issues when we're thinking about violence. Communities that have higher levels of depression and anxiety also have higher levels of like gun violence and interpersonal violence and, lower ability to like emotionally regulate. So all of these things. Mm-hmm.
I did talk to a neuroscientist about how the rising temperatures add to violence because people are more irritable, and that actually can lead to war and regular, everyday street fights and all kinds of unforeseen outcomes.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to your point in the beginning of our conversation, sometimes it's hard to like connect these issues and bring them to the real stakes of like people's lives outside of these buzzwords. But when you do take a step back, it does make a lot of sense, right? That you would, if you're living in a place where there's, the air isn't as clean, it's hotter, you're more irritable, you don't really want to be outside or around people, and then those things can, lead to other elements of violence. And it's really unfortunate that not always we're able to connect those dots, because that's really where, if you were going to, put in preventative measures and then, supportive funding to maybe stop some of these crises at the root, you would have to acknowledge that in many ways they are connected.
Talking with Adam Mahoney, and we, when we come forward, I want to touch on, I'm sure, myriad ways that the new administration's policy changes are impacting already the greening of our country and the fight against this climate emergency, and what does it really mean? I'm not this is not the doom and gloom channel, and I always do my best to focus on what we want, not what we don't want, what we can do, not what we can't do, but we also have to understand the objective conditions. So we'll do a little bit of both of those when we continue on KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
The revolution will not be televised.
What's up? It is Killer Mike, also known as Michael Winder, and I'm encouraging you to listen to more, not less, of Truth Time with Dr. Cornel West and Senator Nina Turner on KBLA Talk 1580.
We all hear the radio ads about the IRS. They tell you to be afraid, to be scared, and they try to frighten you into calling. I'm not here to do that. Tax Relief Advocates is different. TRA is here to tell you that if you owe money to the IRS, whether it's $5,000, $50,000, or $500,000, we have a solution. It doesn't matter if you're sitting in your car, at work, or with your kids. No matter where you are, call now. 800-550-9651. Don't lose hope. TRA can eliminate or reduce what you owe to the IRS. Generous programs are now available that can give you a fresh start. Our passion is taxes and helping individuals fix their IRS problems. We have over 1,000 5-star reviews on Google and an A+ with the Better Business Bureau. You don't need to be afraid of the IRS any longer. End your tax nightmare today by visiting us online at TRA.com or call 800-550-9651. That's 800-550-9651. Tax Relief Advocates. Real solutions for real people.
Stories are power. The Black Land Lost Narrative Archive Project is an effort to collect, preserve, and amplify stories of Black land loss. It will form an invaluable resource for scholars, authors, historians, educators, storytellers, policymakers, and change agents who wrestle with issues of restitution, reparations, racial inequality in home ownership, and the racial wealth gap. Through documenting stories of Black land loss, the archive will help demonstrate the magnitude of what Black families have lost and will continue the national dialogue to encourage paths to restitution, rebuilding, and healing. Support the Black Land Lost Narrative Archive Project by visiting www.blacklandlost.org or by donating at www.blacklandlost.org/donate. Spread the word to inspire awareness, activism, leadership, and change. And join us in making a lasting impact. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
Yes, indeed. Adam Mahoney is my guest. He's a national climate and environment reporter at Capital B News, a nonprofit newsroom, a thing that clearly we need more of in this environment of mis and disinformation. It's hard to know where to start, but the administration, the current Republican administration, under the leadership of Donald Trump, this MAGA, New Confederate team, they've been very aggressive in their rejection of the science, very aggressive in, first of all, pulling the U.S. out of the climate accord, and then going after what they're calling, what do they call it, the Green News? I can't remember. Whatever the disparaging name is for the parts of the bipartisan infrastructure project that had to do with building up green infrastructure, including things like charging stations. And I'm wondering, from what you can tell so far, what's the practical impact of this? First, like, the day-to-day impact. If I got an electric car, am I screwed? Like, what kinds of practical impacts are we seeing already?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot depending on where you are geographically in the country, but when you are thinking about maybe electric vehicles, for example, in a place like California that has been independently building out its infrastructure and charging stations, it's not going to be as big of an impact versus a place, maybe in like Florida or Georgia, where actually a lot of these vehicles are being constructed and manufactured, they actually don't have the infrastructure for charging and whatnot. So it'll be a more difficult transition if you are trying to do that independently in, southern states, quite honestly, and a more expensive transition. But when we're thinking about like the immediate environmental and health impacts, communities that are living next to, oil and gas infrastructure, they're definitely going to feel this shift the most and strongly. And this is another buzz statistic, but basically Black communities across the country, Black folks across the country, they're 75% more likely than white people to be living next to these kind of facilities. And, statistically, our Black folks are, most exposed to pollution from oil and gas sources. And under, the Trump administration, as Republicans are rolling back this desire to build out quote unquote clean energy infrastructure, whether that be, solar or wind, that means they're doubling down and wanting to increase, natural gas and fossil fuel production. So, these communities, which they exist in California, but they're primarily in places across like the Gulf South and in the Midwest, they're going to feel that impact pretty quickly if these facilities do ramp up production. A lot of the Trump administration's rollbacks, though, are honestly just around increasing the power that these businesses and corporations have to kind of do what they've already been doing. So it's going to be a rolling back of like fines and fees, some of those different things that Democrat governments have implemented to maybe make it tougher for these places to just pollute indiscriminately. But I don't know if it's going to necessarily actually shift what's going to happen on the ground. It'll just make it a little bit easier for these actors that have been already, if oil has already been extracted from the earth, it is already going to be refined at very high rates in this country. That's not going to shift.
So really we're talking about more of a deregulatory, kind of corporate free-for-all than anything else in that sense. Yeah,
exactly. The idea, which advocates are saying this is not actually going to happen, but the idea behind Trump's moves is to make it cheaper and easier for these companies to do their business.
Speaking of companies doing their business, I know that Biden made a move to protect the coastline in the Gulf of Mexico, in the East Coast, the West Coast, and also Alaska, to protect them from offshore oil and gas drilling. And my understanding was that particular move by the Biden administration was pretty ironclad, but I'm already starting to read some rumblings from the Trump administration about trying to undo this when it comes to, it's really hundreds of miles of California coastline alone that were preemptively protected. What are your thoughts on whether that protection can hold through this administration?
Yeah. So that was one of, Biden's last moves in January before he left office. And it does look like, given Trump's kind of free-for-all and in terms of like executive orders and executive actions, that he will have the ability to roll back that ban if necessary. But the interesting thing is, in the beginning of the Biden administration, he did open up, particularly the Gulf of Mexico, to leases for oil drilling.
Yes, I remember that.
Corporations didn't actually buy a majority of the land lots. So it does seem that business, the quote-unquote market, has shifted a bit. So even if leases are open, it's not really a guarantee that folks will actually, take them to start drilling again.
Is that because of a shift towards clean energy or EVs, or is it just an economic calculation? Why is that shift happening?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both the economic calculations in addition to the shift to clean energy. Over the last decade, clean energy sources have been growing at a faster rate than fossil fuel energy sources, and they're also substantially cheaper to produce energy from. So, I mean, it's really funny because, you know, we all look at, like, the state of Texas, for example, as, you know, that's oil country. That's where a lot of this is happening.
Big oil,
Yeah, but Texas has actually been leading the country in clean energy production for years now, quietly. I mean, those are not things that a Republican governor really wants to make public, but, you know, and a lot of these places, it's just quite honestly, money is what's going to drive a lot of these decisions, more so than maybe the health or the environmental impacts. And right now, it is cheaper to do the thing that is better for the planet.
So we may actually be saved by the economics of this in some ways?
Yes and no. I mean, I think Republicans will ultimately, they will take whatever is the cheaper option. It's just without incentives from the federal government to make clean energy sources continuously decline in their market price. It's just going to spread out that transition. You know, so like under Biden, he had incentives to accelerate this transition within the next 2 decades. But without, you know, maybe federal government subsidies to speed this up, this is something that could take many, many more years than that, and that would not be good, quite frankly.
I mean, we don't have those years, do we? Do we even have those years? I mean, no one knows precisely, right? Is there? I mean, there are people who still think that we can, you know, the planet will miraculously recover itself, or that this is all exaggerated. But from the science as you read it, reporting on this every day, can we, and by we, I'm talking about the species. I'm not talking about a political party. I'm talking about a species that needs a habitable environment. Can we weather this storm?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely can. It just requires a lot more targeted action from places like the United States. So we have, you know, scientists put a 1.5 Celsius degree threshold on, you know, increased temperatures across the world. And we have passed that level that they said that was like the quote unquote tipping point. Once we got there, climate catastrophe would start, you know, wreaking havoc on the globe. And we've seen the impacts of that both in the United States. We had a record hurricane season last year, but also globally in the global south, and in places like West Africa and Central America, they've been experiencing, you know, insane increases in drought seasons, which is, you know, ruin their agricultural seasons. They're not able to really grow food for their people anymore, on top of sea level rise and flooding that has really, you know, destroyed a lot of communities along the coast in the global south. So we've reached a critical threshold, but that does not mean it's too late. And I think, you know, under the Biden administration, that was really the point that, you know, folks working in the Environmental Protection Agency and a lot of Biden's climate advisors were trying to make, that with, you know, this trillions of dollars being directly pumped in a quick time frame into, you know, making our air cleaner, into weaning off of fossil fuel production, into, you know, electric vehicles in some ways, and clean energy sources like that is what needs to be done, especially from, you know, the perspective of the United States, which I don't think most people know, but like the U.S. is statistically most responsible for climate change. We have been the highest polluter in the history of the world since industrialization in the, you know, late 1800s. Like in many ways, it is our duty to address this because we caused the problem in a lot of different ways.
Like I always said, you broke it, you buy it. Adam Mahoney is my guest, and you're welcome to get in the conversation. We will continue after news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. Dallas, Texas honored its first black police officer, William McDuff, over a century after his death. McDuff, who served in the late 1800s, was murdered weeks after taking office. The city recognized his contributions and the mystery of his story. Education Secretary Linda McMahon stated that federal funding for essential education programs will continue, even as the Trump administration moves to shut down the Department of Education. Programs will be transferred to other agencies for efficiency. Tuberculosis cases in the U.S. are at their highest in over a dozen years, with over 10,000 cases reported last year, an 8% increase from 2023. And a federal judge dismissed a copyright lawsuit against Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You, ruling that music experts couldn't prove enough similarity between her song and one by Louisiana songwriter Vince Vance. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has been at the forefront of inflammatory bowel disease research and care for over 50 years. Learn more about research, education, and support at Crohn'sColitisFoundation.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
It was a season-changing moment for the USC women's basketball team and the NCAA women's tournament. USC All-American Juju Watkins fell to the floor Monday night midway through the first quarter, clutching her right knee. 2 hours later, an MRI exam revealed that the sophomore from Compton had torn her ACL and will need surgery. Watkins' season is over, and quite possibly USC's dreams of winning the national championship. Watkins' knee buckled as she was racing down court with the ball between 2 Mississippi State defenders. The leading candidate for Player of the Year honors had to be carried to the locker room. USC won the game to advance to the Sweet 16, but losing Watkins for the rest of the tournament and maybe part of next season is a devastating blow to the USC program and the city of Los Angeles. More on Watkins later today in my afternoon sports minute. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
At the tone, please record your message.
You ready?
Let's rock it!
Mr. Travis Smiley, preach it. Thank you, man. Politics in this country is crazy. You put things in perspective that even I didn't. The right is playing fast and loose with facts and scapegoating everyone under the sun, especially black and brown people. As a white man, I do not agree with this, and I am on my black and brown brothers and sisters' side. Fight the good fight. We know that I am part of the resistance. Let's fight the power.
Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your flag. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. At Exquisite Family Mortuary, we know how overwhelming it can be planning a meaningful farewell for your loved one. Secure your peace of mind by calling Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. That's Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. From traditional funeral services to memorials to direct cremation, pre-needs, and more. Call Charlotte White at Exquisite Family Mortuary for Southern hospitality in Southern California. That's Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. Exquisite Family Mortuary is located nearby in Inglewood, California. Exquisite Family Mortuary, where your loved one becomes our loved one.
If you're living with dry age-related macular degeneration or dry AMD, you may be at risk for developing geographic atrophy or GA. GA can be unpredictable and progress rapidly, leading to irreversible vision loss. Now there's something you can do to
slow it down, get it going slower.
Izervay is proven to slow GA progression.
Izervay, it's GA going slower.
Izervay or avastin-capted Pagel is a prescription eye injection injection used to treat GA. Don't take it if you have an infection or active swelling in or around your eye. Izervay can cause eye infection, retinal detachment, or increased risk of wet AMD. Izervay may temporarily increase eye pressure. Your vision may be impaired after an eye injection or exam. Don't delay. Ask your doctor about Izervay today.
Izervay gets GA going somewhere.
Visit Izervay.com. That's IZERVAY.com.
Heard any other talk radio lately that sounds anything like this? You're listening to Unapologetically Progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Award-winning journalist Adam Mahoney is with me. He is a national climate and environment reporter at Capital B News. Man, there's a lot to go through here. So we were talking about sort of the everyday impacts of this new administration and their climate denial stance on everything. What does it mean that our country has been pulled out of the Paris Accords? I mean, we're talking about whether or not we have enough time to save the planet. And I know we've consistently heard that we do, but now we've got at least a 4-year, possibly 4 decades or more setback, because who knows what the impacts of some of these policies will be over time, right? It's not just 4 years. So what is your understanding of what us pulling out of the Paris Accords, that global climate agreement, what does that mean in practical terms?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of global impacts if the United States continues on its current trajectory under the Trump administration, which is really just considering climate change not a reality. And because this is a global issue, right, and it is going to impact the most vulnerable places on this earth first when we're thinking about rising sea levels and hurricanes and drought and the results that come from that. It needs to be a collective, grouping to address this issue. And the United States, quite frankly, is just it's a powerful place, right? And when other Western countries see that we are not taking these issues seriously, they're going to be more likely, to roll back some of their elements of because it's going to be expensive. I mean, that's one of Trump's biggest issues with the funding for climate-related things is that we're talking about trillions of dollars in infrastructure and really changing the way that we interact with each other and a lot of the world more generally. So yeah, it will have a serious impact, and I think your point about it's not just these 4 years; it's like decades from now. That's the reality, and I think that was one of the issues that the Biden administration had in their messaging around all of this spending is that they were shelling out billions of dollars for projects that are necessary and important and honestly life-saving, but these are things that folks won't feel the impacts from and the benefits from for decades from now, and that's hard to connect those dots for people that the issue of climate change, is immediate. It is really, we're talking more about the future than right now, and for a lot of people, especially people who are struggling with the costs of living on the day-to-day level, you can't really think about what I need to do right now to protect my family 20 years from now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. We got to keep the lights on. We all have stuff to do and stuff to pay for. But one of the things, we passed a bill this past election cycle here in California. I'm sure you tracked it, that invests in parklands and invests in the greening of, California. Specifically, there's a whole bunch of money that's coming to LA. And part of the pitch for that bill is if we invest this now, we can spend $2 billion now instead of $15 billion in another 10 years. And I would imagine the reverse is also true. If you don't make the investment now, if you invest nothing now, you're gonna not only will it cost you more later, but it's more damage will have been done because you didn't do that preventative work.
Exactly that. I mean, This relates to, some of Trump's rolling back of air pollution rules recently. Even the federal government has said over the last couple of years that for every dollar invested into, lowering our pollution today, that will save us $10 of economic value in the future. So, to your point, if you don't do this preventative work now, it's just going to get increasingly more expensive, and also you're going to see the impacts, right? People are going to lose their lives, lose their homes, and potentially, lose their communities if this work is not done now.
So, okay, we went into news, traffic, and sports, and you were talking about, which I actually didn't know, that the United States is the biggest global producer, polluter in the history of the world. I mean, I could have guessed, but I might have put them on a competition with China or India for that title. But I guess it's because we've been doing it so long, right, since the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly.
We had a head start on everybody in ruining the planet. And that's kind of this whole concept behind the fact that in reality, the wealthy nations like China and the U.S., we actually owe, and the whole, Western bloc of nations, we actually owe money in a sense, or we have a climate debt, if you want to put it that way, to Africa and other, what you call the global south, which means those nations that literally are in the south part of the planet, because we've polluted and now they're dealing with the impacts of our profits, right? Is that how that is? Explain how that's conceived and why it's seen that way.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, we're also interconnected, right? So if you have a place like the United States, to your point, we are, like I said, the highest polluter in the history of the world, and that is because we have been doing it for over 100 years. And, China is a bigger polluter today, but their industrial revolution happened many, many decades after ours. We are, there are states in the United States that pollute 10 times as much as countries in Africa, right? And
wow.
But those are the places that are feeling these impacts more acutely just because they don't have the infrastructure to protect themselves. And I mean, that is what a lot of countries that are feeling these impacts now are saying. They, it's the reality is this is not our doing, but we're feeling it first. There needs to be some support. And through the United Nations, there has been this push for this idea of, it's called loss and damage, which is basically climate reparations, that wealthy countries, wealthy nations that are most responsible for the destruction that we're seeing in these parts of the world today need to pay up. And the United States, under the Biden administration, did agree to join the Loss and Damage Fund, but they also said they were going to put a lot less money into the pot than was expected, and now under a Trump administration, it could be likely that we're not putting any money into that pot at all. And without wealthy nations paying their fair share, it really will just fall on the most vulnerable. And it's the exact same thing that we're seeing in the United States, right? I mean, Black communities. I'm sorry, I pull out a lot of statistics, but
no, we like statistics around here. We like data.
Yeah. Black communities use the least amount of energy in the United States, and also are responsible for the least amount of individual emissions. So, like pollution, whether that be from your homes or driving. The average Black American does both.
That's because your grandma says, "Close the door. Do not let my good air out."
Exactly.
What is wrong with you? Turn that heater off.
Yes. Yeah. We know, one, because of the cost of these things, like you're not going to waste, when you have the heater on, or if you want to turn the AC or the fan on, you're not going to waste that. And also, we have built communal skills to kind of navigate some of these different things. I just think about heat waves. Now that I live in New Orleans, like folks here know how to navigate a heat wave without air conditioner or a fan because they've been doing it for decades and generations. But at the same time, if we're the least responsible, we are experiencing, floods more than any other community. We live in hotter neighborhoods than any other, race or ethnic group. So in many ways, we're seeing that exact same disparity within the United States.
So, okay, when we come forward, Adam Mahoney, I want to talk about what we can do about it, because I feel like objective reality, data, all good, but also solutions are also important. We'll look at that when we continue on KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
They say the hardest part of getting something done is getting started. Well, we did that 30 years ago when California first took on the tobacco industry. Now, smoking is down 60%, lung cancer 42%. A couple of our cities have already ended tobacco sales. A California without big tobacco isn't just possible. It's already happening. See our progress at undo.org.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Ray Richardson, your sports connection here at KBLA Talk 1580. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough every Saturday night at 7 for Out of Bounds, the show that brings some flavor to the world of sports for 60 minutes. We take you beyond the scores and press conferences. We give you our point of view, the way black folks see what's going down. You can join the conversation and give us your analysis at 1-800-920-1580. Out of Bounds, every Saturday night at 7 on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
You like the style, though?
A new day is on the horizon.
Behind every great moment in history, there's a woman whose story went untold. This March on KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing those hidden narratives to light. Hear extraordinary stories of women who transformed science, politics, arts, and community. Women you've never heard of, but should know. Celebrating Women's History Month on KBLA Talk 1580, where every story matters.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. The Autopsy Initiative provides a second autopsy free of charge for victims' families who have lost their loved ones due to a police-related death. The services offered through the initiative include the completion of a second autopsy, disclosure of preliminary findings, and a final autopsy report. A police-related death is when an individual is harmed by police officers using deadly force, which results in an individual's death. Police-related death includes in-custody deaths, including those that arise during contact with law enforcement officers during arrest, pursuit, booking, transport, or incarceration. The Autopsy Initiative has a team of board-certified pathologists on call. An autopsy request may be completed by anyone with a close relationship with the victim, which may include the victim's spouse, partner, relative, close friend, or lawyer. To request a free second autopsy for a victim of police violence, please visit knowyourrightscamp.com. That's knowyourrightscamp.com. Then click on Autopsy, then click on Request. At KBLA, we believe in justice for victims of police violence. We say their names, and we don't black down. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Life blooms in beautiful ways. The Athea Center invites you to celebrate At the End with Red Gala, honoring the strength and resilience of Black women living with HIV. Join us for an evening of empowerment as we launch the Barbara Cambridge Scholarship and kick off Herstory Month with our theme, Life in Full Bloom. Your support helps create vital HIV programming and builds a future where every voice is heard and every story matters. The End with Red Gala, because every flower deserves to bloom. To learn more and to donate, visit theatheacenter.org.
KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
Okay, I want to focus on solutions, but I do have to ask you about something that's in the breaking news category. Adam Mahoney, the Supreme Court today rejecting an appeal in a legal case, Juliana versus the United States. This was a case where young people had brought legal action demanding that the government take responsibility for the climate emergency. And the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. The Department of Justice issued a statement calling the lawsuit a distraction. I guess this is something that's been going on spanning 4 different presidents. They were young when they started, maybe not so much now. And I guess it's also inspired other cases. What does this mean that the Supreme Court is rejecting this? What will it end up meaning?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the most tangible level for young people in the country, it does signify something pretty serious, and the fact that the case was brought because it was young people saying that the United States of America was not protecting their right to a free and clean society by ignoring the threats of climate change. And outside of maybe the legal implications or ramifications of that ruling, it does I could see young people in this country say it signals that maybe what we're saying and what we're seeing and fearing about our future is not being taken seriously by the powers to be. Like you said, this case has spanned many years now and has also inspired other cases across the country, especially at the state level. We've seen teenagers and young people in the Pacific Northwest and
Montana.
Yeah, they've brought these cases as well in their states. So I don't know if I can speak to the real legal fallback of it, but just from a community perspective, it does signal something serious for young people.
Yeah, the attorney for the case said, Julie Olson, the chief legal counsel, said that the case sparked a global youth-led movement for climate rights that continues to grow. It has empowered young people to demand their constitutional right to a safe climate and future. And I think that's a great framing because although, of course, it's disappointing and terrible, and I don't know that we expected anything else from this extreme court, but the fact that they took their quest to the courts has inspired others, and in some cases has inspired victories on a statewide level. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And that's one of I think the great things around the organizing and activism space within, climate and environment issues is that maybe the big cases or the big moments that make it to mainstream national media are not always positive. There is a lot of coalition building on the ground, and it's spanning generations, right? So, I mean, to the point of these were teenagers, younger people when they first brought their cases, and they're full-grown adults now who are, still in this space and still inspiring other people to take action. That's really amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of taking action, what are the things you see as a journalist, you cover as a journalist that seem to be working in terms of solutions? And I'm talking about right now in the environment that we're currently in, which is fraught. I mean, frankly, for anyone that thinks that the scientists are correct.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll say my reporting has really taken me around the country, back and forth, and I think the through line between communities that are, successfully protecting themselves, they are, it's people who understand that, the outcomes of their neighbor are also, related to the outcomes of their own lives. So it's a lot of, that really on-the-ground grassroots work that has been successful. So it might be something as simple as if we go back to the beginning of our call around tree planting, it's like those communities that got together with other people on their block to plant some trees, around bus stops or on the corner to offer shade and then lower the temperature in their neighborhoods. It's communities and folks and coalitions like in Los Angeles. There was the Stand LA coalition that, it was years in the making, but groups of activists from all different parts of LA County got together to work together to try to ban oil drilling in LA, and that was successful in a lot of ways. So I think if you don't have maybe the governmental support, or if you're living in a red state and you don't even have the state level support, really boiling down your life impacts from climate change to the neighborhood level and getting together with folks that are also feeling those impacts, that's where I see, the most success.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what you can control. We probably can't control the Paris Climate Accords. We can try to vote and have an impact on who is making those decisions globally, nationally, internationally. But when it comes to our own neighborhoods, we do control whether or not we plant a tree or, make other adjustments. I mean, I feel like a hypocrite saying this because I still have a lawn. But it's amazing to me that any of us still have lawns, for example, in California. And so those little things. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say exactly, is doing what you can control. And I think the little individual actions, obviously, they add up to the neighborhood level actions. And then that broadens to, greater community level things and shifts in the way that we're interacting with the world. That's really where the change has to happen. And
the other thing is then you don't have to have an argument with your neighbor who's a climate denier or someone who's a skeptic. You can just plant the doggone tree.
Exactly.
But some of it is also dialogue and conversation, right? And it reminds me a little bit of reparations in that we have to talk about it so that people understand what we mean and why it impacts our communities. I was in Kenya last year, and I was surprised to see, in Tanzania, especially Tanzania, I was surprised to see how aware folks are there of climate emergency impacts because it's part of their day-to-day. The fishermen and women in Tanzania are having trouble with their fish. They're, the migration of the animals is changing, which impacts tourism and their natural beauty of their nation. So they're very aware of it in a kind of practical way that some of us, I think, are not.
Yeah, no, that's real. I mean, even for me, moving from Los Angeles, I live in New Orleans now. Like, that was actually very eye-opening to me as someone who is in this world 24/7, but like the average person in New Orleans is much more, well-versed on the actual impacts of climate change. But that is because this is a place that not only has the economy shifted because of climate and environmental threats, but, the entire city of New Orleans was kind of irreversibly altered by a disaster. So, of course, that is, intertwined into the ways that people interact with each other and see the world. And that actually just does remind me, I was just in LA doing reporting, it's about to be 3 months since the LA wildfires, and I was in Altadena, and I was speaking to a man that lost his house to the Eden fire, and he basically said he understands it now, that like we are all going to have in his words, he said we're all going to have our Katrina moment. And it's just like how we adapt to that. It's not something that you can necessarily run from. But if we do know that these impacts are going to meet and come to our doorstep one day, you will be more likely to act.
Yeah. Well, we have a minute and a half here, Adam Mahoney. You want to tell us how to track your work and what you do and where else we might want to be keeping an eye on if we would like to stay abreast of what's happening with our planet, our natural habitat.
Yeah. I mean, so I work for Capital B. It's a Black nonprofit newsroom, having all Black staff reporting on Black communities across the country. And you can, check out our work. And also we have 2 weekly newsletters that you can subscribe to, and you can find them by just going to our website, which is capitalbnews.org. And, we're putting out work across the country and local communities every day, and you can follow my work on any social media. My username is Adam L. Mahoney.
Adam L. Mahoney. Okay, well I got 30 seconds left for you here. Just describe why a nonprofit newsroom is different.
Yeah, I mean, we are not beholden to corporate interests or advertisements in any way dictating the work that we do. And it allows us to really frame stories in a way that we're not chasing clicks. It's just about meeting people where they are and really giving people information that they need and deserve.
Not owned by a billionaire. Capital B News. Adam Mahoney, it's a pleasure to talk with you.
I appreciate it.
We've got news, traffic, and sports, and more straight ahead on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. Dallas, Texas honored its first black police officer, William McDuff, over a century after his death. McDuff, who served in the late 1800s, was murdered weeks after taking office. The city recognized his contributions and the mystery of his story. Education Secretary Linda McMahon stated that federal funding for essential education programs will continue, even as the Trump administration moves to shut down the Department of Education. Programs will be transferred to other agencies for efficiency. Tuberculosis cases in the U.S. are at their highest in over a dozen years, with over 10,000 cases reported last year, an 8% increase from 2023. And a federal judge dismissed a copyright lawsuit against Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You, ruling that music experts couldn't prove enough similarity between her song and one by Louisiana songwriter Vince Vance. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.